My name is Judge Hamilton Gayton. I'm a Tennessee Circuit Judge. I'm a graduate of Vanderbilt University and Vanderbilt Law School. I've been a judge for 17 years. I'm also an author of a book that was published in 1987 entitled To Circle the Cross, which is a fictional story of an MIA retained in Laos after the war, predicated upon the central fact that we abandoned 600 American MIAs in Laos and that they were not covered by any treaty. I also introduced to you and have sent you my court officer who works for me during the day, and together we work in odd hours trying to prove that there are live American POWs in Southeast Asia. His name is Kambang Sibahong. Kambang is a 10-year veteran of the secret war in Laos. He's the 13th ranked member of the Free International Lao. And so I bring to you a little bit of a different viewpoint. I'm not a Vietnam veteran. I've never been to Asia. I advise Kambang and his friends who are part of the freedom fighters internationally on what to do with evidence that they have been able to procure from Southeast Asia. Kambang has many contacts, even has family, even one family member who's a ranking member of the communist government today. The bottom line is that I'm convinced that there are over 300 American POWs.
Judge Gayton sends me a letter, Easter of this year. Says, I have information about your father who might be alive. I say to myself, another one. My father's dead. But I call him up because this time I'm interested. I want to follow up the leads, and he's got basically information which I didn't think could come from just anybody about my father. He's got my father's social security number, he's got my father's birth date, he's got his correct rank, and he's got his name, Albro Lundy, which is as unique as his social security number. And besides, he's dead. I said, where is this information coming from, and why would somebody bring information about Albro Lundy out? He's dead. No one would be so stupid as to try and pull a hoax. He's dead. I better follow this up a little more, because I couldn't understand where that information came from. So I start writing. Actually, what happened was, a little while after that, my mother got information from the government, the very same information that Judge Gayton had, sent to us in a Twix. And in that Twix, it had a cover letter, and Chuck Trowbridge was the person that wrote the cover letter, and he said, disregard this information, it really is nothing but a dog tag report. And my mother didn't look any further. She took that and threw it in the trash. My father's dead. She threw it in the trash. I said, Mother, I'd really have liked to have seen that. I had to get my own copy. I called up and got a copy, and I read through it again, and I said, well, dog tags don't have birth dates on it. Chuck, how could that be? Why did you call this a dog tag report? Chuck hasn't responded to me as far as that's concerned, but
Who's Chuck?
Chuck Trowbridge. He testified here earlier. I'm sorry to be so familiar. I said, well, I'm going to read the report itself because it was basically a letter purportedly written for my father with this information, and I didn't believe much of the information on it, but I didn't know where that correct information had come from, and that was very unusual to me. And then I saw something at the bottom of the letter that amazed me. It said thumbprints. Now, I didn't get the original. I got a transcription, but it said thumbprints. Nowhere...
Is this from the judge?
No, this is from the DIA. And nowhere in the cover letter that said disregard this did it mention these thumbprints. Nowhere. And so I called up and I said, there's thumbprints on the original? Have you checked? Have you checked my father's thumbprints? I think we can get rid of this right now. Because to be honest with you, I didn't tell my mother anything about the investigation I was doing. I opened the case as a case in my law office, and I was going to disprove it because my father was dead. This was a hoax. And I spent literally thousands and maybe tens of thousands of dollars worth of man-hours trying to disprove this case. I didn't want to bring it back into my family. My father was dead, and I knew what this would do to our family if I brought it up again. 3.5 months worth of investigation before I told anybody in our family about this. You know what I was told when I asked about the fingerprints? Have you checked the fingerprints? Now, this has been in the DIA's hands now for 5 months. They say, we don't do that unless the next of kin requests it. That was the response. I said, well, I'm next of kin. And they said, no, you're not. I said, well, what do you call me? Well, no, you're not next of kin. Your mother's next of kin, so we had to go through a little formality. But I requested it, and I got an answer back. There are no fingerprints in your father's file. There are no fingerprints to check on him. And I said, my father had top secret security clearance, nuclear, intelligence, he was ROTC, went to regular. How could there not be fingerprints in my father's file? And then I looked through the file very carefully. I'd like to draw your attention to this next blow up. And it says right there, there's a letter in his file. It says, attached are forms and fingerprint card on the above subject.
But look at the date on it.
Right, but they don't throw anything away.
No, but
Right, that doesn't make any difference when the date is. This 22nd of December, 1954. That means my father was fingerprinted and the card was in his file. And then more importantly, if you look down there on the bottom, it says National Agency check is completed on this individual. That means the fingerprints were good. That means Henry card classifications had been done. That means my father's fingerprints had been checked out and the government had a set of fingerprints in his file. That very file I was looking at, much to my amazement, when I flipped it over to find the attachment, there was no fingerprint card attached, nor were there any Henry classification cards. I can't understand that. I still can't understand that. It's absolutely unbelievable. This is a smoking gun letter that there is cover up in our government. It couldn't possibly happen if there wasn't, because guess what? Somebody had to pull that card from his file. It just doesn't magically disappear. They just forgot to take out the cover letter.
At the end of 1991, on December 19th, our second child, our first son, was born. And he is Albro Lundy the fourth.
Wow.
And 6 days later, we went to Christmas at Albro's mother's house. And she says, the government sent some fingerprints of your father. I just tossed them in the trash. So there was this moment at the birth of our son named after his father and at evidence sent from the government that fingerprints had been found of his father, and his mother didn't want to deal with it. So he's like, mother, you can't just throw these in the trash. So she was like, well, if you want to deal with it, you can deal with it. And so, and Albro said, well, there's a very easy thing. We just asked them to match the fingerprints that are in his file. So this is what was happening personally. And at the same time, a writer, Monica Jensen Stevenson, wrote the book, Kiss the Boys Goodbye. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but she details how the government has actually systematically left men behind, multiple wars, even though the mantra is leave no one behind. Often the administrative action afterwards for expediency is to leave them behind. So we had this unusual fusion of this momentum building of so many families that were lied to, that were told the wrong thing. People seeing discrepancies. So there was this energy building in the MIA POW community for greater answers. And it coincided with this personal information coming about Albro's father that he then began on a journey to validate.
And let me go back just another step, because you're right. Like I said, dead and dead and dead, because we believe that. That's the only way we could go on. Although it's very
also what you were told.
Yes, because that's what we were told. We said he did not. So, and essentially, I found out later that they would kill off most of those guys bureaucratically, because they didn't want to keep paying combat pay. I mean, could you imagine having to expend combat pay on, instead of buying helicopters, you'd have to pay these widows and orphans, quote unquote, widows and orphans. So you can see there's a tinge of bitterness there that comes up, but that's truly what happened. I found that out. But I wanted to go back to the judge, because it was in, I can't remember the actual. We've got a lot of documents, the actual date, but
It was around Easter after that.
Yeah, it was.
Right here, one day, one Saturday, the day before Easter in 1991, I received a letter from a judge in Kentucky.
1991. There you go. See, And that was, and then all of a sudden I get fingerprints, or my mother gets.
Why did they send fingerprints? What was the point of that?
So I'll spin back a little bit. He sent me a letter on the judicial stationery. I open it up. I'm at my office. I'm trying to get things done for Easter, which is, Good Friday is right before. It's Holy Saturday. And I open it up, and in it, he says, don't read past this. If you don't want to learn anything further about your father and don't want to open up the past. That was the first lines, right? And I'm like, okay, I don't know, because I hadn't sent that FOIA yet, right? And I open it up, and he says, I work closely with a mom. And I don't know if you know who the mom are, but some great Laotians who have been betrayed over and over again. But essentially, my dad was lost flying a rescue mission for the mom. And it was a search and rescue for them. And it was Durax helicopters, CIA helicopters, that he was flying cover for to get these Hmong freedom fighters away from the North Vietnamese regular army. And so, and I have spoken to the brother of the man who he says shot my father's plane down. That's how we have really drilled down on this, try to find out what happened to my dad. And so the judge goes on to say that these Hmong freedom fighters know of men that are still alive and are held captive, and they can get information to us if we want to know about that information. And in the same context, the fingerprints come in, and then I get a call from a woman named Gladys Fleckenstein. And Gladys Fleckenstein's son has been missing. And see, we never were part of the POW MIA families before this. I mean, not at all, even though a friend I know, a guy I was at Holy Trinity grade school with, whose dad was lost, started Sons and Daughters in Touch.
Tony Cordero, right. But so for us, it was just dropping in. And for my mother, because Senator Smith his staff had been putting together with Monica Jensen Stevenson all of this information saying men have been left behind. And that's what convinced her. She, in her heart of hearts, I think ultimately wanted to close the door on this. I mean, for her to put her wedding ring back on at that point was really brutal, incredibly tough for her, because she had in her mind closed the door, didn't believe that he was alive, didn't want to believe he was alive.
It does seem like within the context of this, that why does the government send, what did these fingerprints just came out of the blue? Like the government just sent them to your mom?
Someone turned them into the government. And I think the government has a duty to share any information about your loved one with the family.
So, these came from Laos.
Fingerprints came from Laos.
Yes. But here's the thing about that. It also came with my dad's dog tag number, right? And his military ID. Now, not itself, but a drawing, not a drawing, but the number itself. So now we have some credibility to attach to these fingerprints. That was amazing, right? How could anybody get that unless, of course, they were with him? Dead or alive, somebody had this information. And so Kathy just said, let's just ask for all fingerprints, match them up. And lo and behold, there weren't any fingerprints in any files anywhere in the entire bureaucrat.
Right.
None, zero. We couldn't match his fingerprints.
Let me make sure I understand. So we've got these things that have been collected in Southeast Asia, the dog tag number. if I have
Oh,
that right?
yeah, we don't know that there's the actual dog tag, but there's the number.
The
Yeah,
number, something related to ID, and the fingerprints. And then it's the US government that gets those to you?
correct.
Okay, and
And
then,
not to me, but to my mother. She's the next of kin.
and around the same time, you get a letter from a judge who has connections with folks in Laos,
His clerk actually was a mom.
was Hmong, and is saying that there are still living Americans captured from the war, still alive in 1991 in Southeast Asia. And these two things happen around the same time,
Correct.
roughly.
And Gladys Fleckenstein then contacts us.
And Gladys Fleckenstein concepts. So all of these things are happening simultaneous, or very in very close time. And so, Kathy, I mean, is this, you said when you got married, I think you said 1984, is that right?
Yes.
Married, that you just had a feeling that, that, I mean, you knew about Albro's dad and what happened. As hard as it was, it seems like the story's over, but you had a feeling that the story wasn't over. And so in 1991, it becomes pretty obvious to you that not only is the story not over, but it's going to take a pretty dramatic turn.
Yes.